Put the tray down. That line is for enrolled students with cleared accounts.
I am enrolled. My card worked this morning.
Then maybe your people need to stop borrowing cards that don't belong to them. Put that tray back right now!
Dad.
Sir, visitors wait outside.
I'm not here for the kitchen.
And that morning, before the tray ever hit the floor, Darius Vale had come to Ellison Prep for a completely different reason. Nobody in that boardroom knew a fortune was sitting quietly at the end of the table. Darius Vale did not look like the kind of man who could write a check for $25 million without blinking. He looked like a man who had come to pick up his daughter for lunch. Navy jacket, no tie, a leather folder worn soft at the corners from years of use. No entourage, no assistant trailing behind him with a tablet. Just a father, early for a meeting he had scheduled around his daughter's lunch period, on purpose. Across the table, Dean Harlan Pierce leaned forward with the practiced warmth of a man who had spent 30 years asking people for money. "Mr. Vale, we are deeply grateful you're even considering us," Pierce said. "Ellison Prep has a history of 142 years. We believe in shaping character before achievement. That is not a slogan to us. It is who we are." Darius nodded slowly, folder still closed in front of him. "I read the proposal twice," he said. "The STEM wing is well designed. The Nutrition Research Partnership makes sense with my company's work. The scholarship expansion is generous on paper." "On paper," Pierce repeated, a small crack in his smile. "I didn't ask you here to talk about paper," Darius said. "I want to know how this school treats the students no one is watching. Not the honor roll assembly, not the fundraising gala. The Tuesday afternoon nobody photographs." Pierce laughed a little too quickly. "We believe in belonging here, Mr. Vale. Every student, every family." "How do students experience that belonging?" Darius asked, "when no donor is watching?" The question sat there unanswered because Pierce didn't actually have an answer. He had a talking point, and the talking point wasn't built for that particular question. "I'd like to see the campus," Darius said, standing. "Quietly. No welcome committee. I'll find my daughter for lunch and then we can finish this conversation." Pierce agreed too fast, relieved to end a conversation that had started to feel like an interview he might fail. Darius folded the leather folder under his arm. Inside it, though no one at that table knew it yet, was a draft of the largest single gift Ellison Preparatory Academy had ever been offered. A gift named for a woman most of the people in that room had never heard of. Lena Vale. Nia Vale had asked her father more than once not to come to the school. Not because she didn't want to see him. She wanted that more than she let herself admit. But because the moment anyone at Ellison learned her last name was attached to money, she became something else in their eyes. Not a senior with a nearly perfect transcript, not a girl who had co-authored a youth nutrition research paper the summer before, a checkbook with a ponytail. She had worked for 2 years to make sure nobody at Ellison knew who her father was. She didn't use the name to skip lines, to get extensions, to get out of anything. She carried an old backpack. She wore the same 3 sweaters in rotation. The only thing on that backpack that meant anything to her was a small silver compass pin, worn soft at the edges, clipped just above the strap where most people wouldn't notice it. It had been her mother's. What Nia had not told her father, because she didn't want him to see her as fragile, and because some part of her still believed she could handle it herself, was that for 3 weeks her meal card had been flagged at the register. Not blocked, just flagged, which meant she was waved out of the regular line and sent to a folding table near the kitchen door, where a woman named Marjorie Whitcomb asked her to confirm eligibility before she could eat. Nia had never seen a rule about it in the handbook. She had looked twice. She had photographs of the receipts, screenshots of the account notifications, each one vague, each one citing a different reason. She had a running log with dates and times. She hadn't shown it to anyone yet. She had been waiting for the right moment, the moment when she could prove it instead of just complaining about it. She didn't know that moment would arrive with her father standing in the doorway. The tray was still in Marjorie's hands when Darius crossed the room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. There was a stillness to him that made people stop talking before he even reached the counter, the way a room quiets when it senses something serious is about to happen, even before anyone says why. "I'm her father," he said. "Darius Vale." Marjorie's chin lifted a fraction. "Parents with concerns can schedule a meeting through the student accounts office. This isn't the appropriate venue." "This is not an account concern," Darius said evenly. "This is a dignity concern. My daughter told you her card worked this morning. You didn't check it. You accused her of using a card that wasn't hers. I have 18 years of experience managing this dining hall," Marjorie said, drawing the words out like armor. "I know what a flagged account looks like." "Then show me the flag," Darius said. "Show me the policy that says a student gets escorted out of the regular line and questioned in front of her classmates before anyone checks a computer screen." For the first time, something in Marjorie's composure flickered. Just barely, a tightening at the corner of her mouth. "There is a verification process," she said, "for accounts with irregular activity." "What counts as irregular?" Darius asked. Marjorie didn't answer. Instead, she turned toward the doorway and raised a hand. "Security," she called out. "I need someone to escort this visitor off the serving floor." A radio crackled near the entrance, and moments later, Officer Rachel Monroe walked in, unhurried, scanning the room the way 20 years on the job teaches a person to do, not looking for the loudest voice, but for the one telling the truth. She took in the scene, a calm man in a navy jacket, a cafeteria manager with her jaw set hard, a girl standing very still, holding nothing now because her tray was gone. "What's the concern here?" Monroe asked, addressing no one in particular yet, which was its own kind of message. "This man is interfering with dining operations," Marjorie said. "I'm having a conversation with the woman who accused my daughter of theft in front of 40 of her classmates," Darius said. "I'd like to keep having it." Monroe glanced at Nia. "You okay?" Nia nodded, but her voice, when it came, was steady in a way that surprised even her. "My card worked at 7:15 this morning. I have the receipt." Monroe looked at Marjorie. "Has anyone actually pulled up her account?" Marjorie's mouth opened, then closed. "I was following procedure." "Which procedure?" Monroe asked. "Exactly." It was in that pause, that small gap where nobody had an answer ready, that Marjorie's eyes landed on the leather folder tucked under Darius's arm. A corner of paper had slipped loose from it, just visible. "I'll need to see what's in that folder," she said, "for cafeteria safety." "No," Darius said, not sharply, just final. Marjorie reached anyway, her gloved fingers closing on the edge of it, tugging it toward the counter in a motion that wasn't violent, but wasn't gentle either. The motion of someone used to being obeyed. A single page slid free and landed face up on the counter between them. Lena Vale Foundation, Ellison Preparatory Endowment Review, $25 million. Marjorie looked at it. The words didn't mean anything to her yet. Just numbers, a name she didn't recognize, a letterhead she'd never seen. But across the room, Dean Harlan Pierce had come through the double doors precisely in time to see it, and his face went the color of the coffee now spreading across the floor by his shoes. He knew exactly what that letterhead meant. He also knew exactly what the small silver pin on Nia's backpack meant, because he had sat in a boardroom meeting not 2 hours earlier where a photograph of that same pin had been part of the proposal. The emblem of a foundation that could either save his school's future or walk out the door and take it with them. "Mr. Vale," Pierce said, his voice climbing an octave he didn't intend. I didn't realize." "You recognize that pin, don't you?" Darius said quietly, not even looking at him yet, still watching Marjorie. Pierce didn't answer. He didn't have to. Everyone in the cafeteria who was paying attention, and by now nearly everyone was, could see that something had just shifted, though most of them didn't yet understand what. "Mr. Vale," Pierce said again, louder this time because he needed the room to hear it before Marjorie made things worse without knowing she was doing it. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere private." "My daughter was corrected publicly," Darius said, "so the correction begins here." Marjorie blinked. "I'm sorry, did he say Vale?" "Darius Vale," Pierce said, and the name seemed to cost him something to say out loud, in front of witnesses, before he'd had the chance to manage the moment the way he'd wanted to. "Founder of Vale Nutrigenomics. The Lena Vale Foundation is reviewing a $25 million endowment for this school." A murmur moved through the cafeteria like wind through wheat. "His daughter," Pierce continued, each word heavier than the last, "is Nia Vale, a senior, full tuition, enrolled and in good standing." Marjorie's face didn't crumble. It hardened instead, the particular hardness of someone realizing they'd made a mistake and deciding, in that instant, to defend the mistake rather than name it. "I had no idea who he was," she said. "That is not a defense," Darius said. "That is the problem." The words landed with a weight nobody in that cafeteria would forget, because everyone understood in that second what he meant. It shouldn't have mattered who his daughter's father was. It shouldn't have taken a $25 million name to make a woman check a computer screen before publicly accusing a 17-year-old girl of stealing her own lunch. Nia had been quiet through all of it, watching her father do what he did best, stay calm while everyone around him lost their footing. But now she stepped forward, and for the first time that morning, the cafeteria's attention shifted fully onto her. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She reached into her backpack, unclipped a small folder of her own, nowhere near as expensive as her father's, just a plain plastic sleeve, and set it on the counter next to the endowment letter. "There is no verification table in the student handbook," she said. "I checked. Twice." Page 41 covers meal account disputes, and it says disputes go through the registrar's office, not a folding table by the kitchen door. She flipped it open. This is my account log. 7 times in 3 weeks my card was flagged. Each time, the reason given was different. Irregular use, pending review, account discrepancy. I asked for documentation each time. I never received any. She looked at Marjorie, not with anger, but with the calm of someone who had simply been waiting for the moment the truth would finally be believed. I'm not the only one, she said. Eli Brooks was sent to the same table in September. So was Marcus Odom in October. I started keeping a log after the second time it happened to me, because I had a feeling it wasn't really about my account at all. The cafeteria had gone almost fully silent now. A few students had lowered their phones, not because the moment had lost interest, but because it had become something too serious to film for entertainment. That's a serious accusation, Pierce said carefully. It's not an accusation, Naya said. It's a pattern, and I have the dates. Behind the counter, half hidden by the steam rising off the serving line, Rosa Delgado had stopped moving entirely. She had worked under Marjorie for 9 years. She had seen the flags go up on certain accounts and not others. She had noticed, without ever letting herself say it out loud, even to her own husband, which students got sent to that folding table and which never did. She needed this job. Her son needed braces. Her rent had gone up twice in 2 years. She had told herself over and over that noticing something wasn't the same as knowing it, and that not knowing it protected her from having to do anything about it. Darius saw her hesitate. He didn't call her out. He simply said, "To the room," in a voice gentle enough that it didn't feel like pressure. No one should have to risk rent money to tell the truth. Pierce, sensing the room's mood shifting further away from him with every second, said quickly, "I want to be clear. There will be no retaliation against any staff member who comes forward with information relevant to this matter. That is a promise, effective immediately, in front of everyone here." It was, Darius noted silently, the first honest thing Pierce had said all morning. And he had only said it because he was afraid of what would happen if he didn't. Rosa exhaled. She untied her apron strings with hands that were shaking slightly, then retied them, steadying herself. "There's an override function," she said quietly, then louder so the room could hear. "In the meal account system. Ms. Whitcomb has always had access to it. She uses it to flag accounts for what she calls review." "For what students?" Darius asked. Rosa hesitated one last time, then said it. "Mostly Black and Latino students, some transfer students. Never the same ones twice in a row, so it never looked like a pattern if you weren't watching closely. But I was watching. There was always enough food, Mr. Vale. She just decided who looked like they deserved to eat without being questioned for it." Marjorie's composure finally cracked at the edges. "I was protecting resources," she said. "This school has budget constraints. Someone has to manage them responsibly." "Nobody's account is unlimited," Rosa said. "But you never flagged the Whitmore twins, and their family hasn't paid a dining fee balance in 2 semesters. The silence that followed was the loudest thing that had happened in that cafeteria all morning. Darius didn't say anything else to Marjorie. He turned instead, walked to the serving line, picked up a clean blue tray, and moved through it himself, plate fork, napkin, the same as any parent visiting for lunch. He carried it to the table where Nia now sat, surrounded by classmates who had quietly begun gathering near her, not for a spectacle, but the way people gather near someone they realize they should have been standing beside all along. He set the tray down in front of her. "Eat, sweetheart," he said. "You did not come here to beg for what was already yours." Nia looked at the tray, then at her father, and something in her chest finally loosened. Not because the situation was resolved, because it wasn't, not yet, but because for the first time in 3 weeks, she didn't feel like she was carrying it alone. A few tables away, Eli Brooks lowered his phone slowly. He had been recording quietly from the moment Marjorie first raised her voice. He caught Nia's eye and mouthed a question, "Is this okay?" And she gave the smallest nod. One by one, without announcement, a handful of students began carrying their own trays over, setting them down near Nia's table. Nobody clapped. Nobody made a speech. It was simply a room deciding, tray by tray, where it stood. By that afternoon, Darius Vale was back in a different room at Ellison Prep. Not the boardroom this time, but a small office borrowed from admissions, where he sat across from Dean Pierce and made a call that Pierce could hear every word of, because Darius wanted him to. "Freeze the agreement," Darius said into the phone. "All Ellison funding, pending independent review. I want a full audit of the dining account system going back 3 years, complaint logs, staff records, camera footage where available. I want it done by outside auditors, not anyone currently on this campus's payroll." He ended the call and looked at Pierce, who had gone pale again for what felt like the 3rd time that day. "This isn't revenge," Darius said. "This is fiduciary responsibility. I don't fund institutions that teach dignity upstairs in a mission statement and ration it downstairs in a lunch line. Mr. "Vale, please," Pierce said. "This can be handled quietly, contained. We can make sure nothing like this happens again without accountability," Darius finished for him. "That's what you mean. Nothing changes if nothing costs anything." Pierce had no answer for that either. Over the following 2 weeks, a team of independent auditors, food service compliance specialists, an education equity attorney, and a forensic data analyst went through Ellison Preparatory's dining account records with a precision the school had never experienced before. What they found confirmed everything Rosa and Nia had already suspected and revealed more than either of them had known. 31 students had been flagged for account review over the previous 2 academic years. 26 of them were Black, Latino, or recent immigrant students. 9 formal complaints had been filed by parents over that same period. Every single one had been marked resolved in the system, despite the fact that not one of the 9 families had ever been contacted by anyone at the school. The override function Rosa described had no supervisory approval requirement. Marjorie Whitcomb could flag, unflag, and annotate any student's account without another staff member's sign-off, and had done so, according to the system logs, more than 200 times. Officer Rachel Monroe, interviewed as part of the review, gave a statement that would matter more than she expected. She said she had responded to disturbances at that folding table on 4 separate occasions over the past year, and each time the student in question had done nothing to warrant a security response. She had simply followed protocol because no one above her had ever questioned whether the protocol made sense. "I read the room every time," she told the auditors. The kids were scared and confused. Ms. Whitcomb was the only one raising her voice.
"I should have asked more questions sooner. I didn't. That's on me too." Eli Brooks had asked Nia twice in the days after the incident whether she wanted him to share what he'd recorded. Both times, she'd asked him to wait.
"I don't want it to be a spectacle," she told him. "I want it to be evidence."
By the time the audit findings were compiled, Nia had changed her mind. Not because she wanted attention, but because she understood that some things only get fixed once enough people can see them clearly at the same time. She asked Eli to share the footage with the school's internal community board, not the wider internet, not a viral moment built for outrage. Just the students, parents, and staff of Ellison Preparatory Academy, watching 2 minutes and 40 seconds of exactly what had happened, without commentary, without a dramatic caption. The only words Eli attached to it were simple. This happened at lunch. It spread through the school community within a day. A local Philadelphia paper picked up a version of the story within a week, careful and factual, without ever naming Nia directly. The Ellison Board of Trustees could no longer describe what had happened as an isolated misunderstanding. Too many people had seen it. Too many numbers backed it up. The board convened on a Thursday evening, in a room usually reserved for donor galas, now filled instead with folded auditors' reports and a silence that had nothing celebratory in it. Dean Pierce made his case first, his voice practiced but thinner than it had been in the boardroom 2 weeks earlier. "This was the conduct of one employee," he said. "A serious lapse, yes, but not a reflection of this institution's values." Darius set a folder of his own on the table, thicker than the one that had started this, filled with the audit's findings. 31 students, he said. 2 years. 200 unsupervised account overrides. 9 complaints marked resolved without a single family being contacted. This was not one bad afternoon, Dean Pierce. This was a system that worked exactly the way it was built to work, for exactly as long as no one powerful enough was paying attention. Camden Ellison, the oldest trustee in the room and a descendant of the school's founding family, set down his pen. "What exactly are you asking of us, Mr. Vale?" "Not your money's worth," Darius said. "Your accountability's worth." Marjorie Whitcomb was given the chance to speak, as procedure required, and she took it, standing straighter than anyone in that room, still in her white cafeteria coat, though her gloves were folded now in her coat pocket rather than on her hands. "I have given 18 years to this cafeteria," she said. "I have never once received a formal reprimand. I followed procedures I believed were appropriate, given the resource constraints this school has faced for years. I did not know who Mr. Vale was. I did not know who his daughter was." "If my daughter had no rich father," Darius asked quietly from across the table, "would you have corrected anything today?" Marjorie opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The silence that followed answered the question more completely than anything she could have said. Darius turned his attention to Pierce next, and this time his voice carried none of the careful patience he'd extended earlier that morning. "How many complaints does a school need," he asked, "before not knowing becomes choosing not to know?" Pierce's jaw tightened. "Complaints go through student services. I'm not personally copied on every dispute." 9 complaints in 2 years about the same folding table and not one of them reached your office, Darius said. Either your student services office is failing this school, or it's succeeding at exactly what it was designed to do. Keep uncomfortable truths from ever reaching someone with the power to act on them. Pierce had built his career on managing rooms like this one, but there was no managing this. He had let something fester because looking directly at it might have cost the school a donor, or a reputation, or a Thursday evening gala photograph. And now it was costing him everything he had been trying to protect. Darius did not walk away from Ellison Preparatory Academy. He explained why, plainly, to a room that had expected him to. There are students in this building who need this scholarship fund, he said. There are families counting on the nutrition program. Pulling every dollar and walking away punishes them for a system they had no part in building. That is not justice. That is just a different kind of harm. He slid a revised agreement across the table. The $25 million endowment proceeds, he said, under new terms. The terms were not negotiable, and he made that clear before anyone attempted to negotiate them. Dean Harlan Pierce would resign, effective at the end of a supervised transition period. Marjorie Whitcomb would be removed immediately from any student-facing role, effective that night. An independent dining equity audit would be conducted annually, permanently, with results reported directly to the board and made available to families upon request. A student food access ombudsman position would be created, a role with real authority, reporting outside the dining department entirely. No retaliation protections would be formally guaranteed in writing for Nia Vale, Eli Brooks, Rosa Delgado, and Officer Rachel Monroe. Scholarship status would never again be visible or flaggable within the cafeteria account system. No student's meal card would carry any marker of financial standing ever again. The Lena Vale Belonging Fund would establish 40 new scholarships, named for a woman who had once said that a school should be a compass, not a gate. The Student Council would gain a standing seat to review dining and account policies every semester, with real voting power, not an advisory role that could be ignored. And the school's public statement would name what happened honestly, not as a misunderstanding, not as an isolated incident, but as a policy failure that had harmed real students for real years. Camden Ellison read the terms twice, then looked around the table at faces that all understood finally that there was no version of this where the school kept its money and kept its silence both. "This is not the price of my money," Darius said into the quiet that followed. "This is the cost of your silence." The board voted. The terms passed. Marjorie Whitcomb left Ellison Preparatory Academy on a Tuesday morning, without ceremony, without spectacle, and without the confrontation some students had quietly hoped for. She walked through the kitchen one last time, past staff who had worked under her for years, some of whom had feared her, some of whom had simply learned to stay quiet around her. Nobody laughed, nobody clapped, nobody said anything cruel. They only looked at her, directly, for what felt like the first time in a long while, because they no longer had a reason not to. Rosa Delgado waited until Marjorie's car had pulled out of the staff lot before she walked to the folding table near the kitchen door, unscrewed the small laminated sign that read "Verification Table," and placed it into a box marked for the ongoing review. It was, she thought,
a strange thing to feel sentimental about removing, but it had loomed larger in her daily life than a simple sign should have, and watching it come down felt like something finally exhaling. Dean Harlan Pierce gave his final address to the Ellison community in the school's atrium, standing at a podium he had once used for donor announcements and building dedications, now used for something far harder to say out loud. There was no verification table policy in this school's handbook, he said, and it visibly cost him to say it plainly, without the softening language he had used his entire career. Students were harmed by a system this administration failed to properly oversee. Complaints were filed and were not adequately addressed. This school failed to live up to its own stated values, and that failure is mine to answer for, along with the individual responsible for its daily practice. Nia was in the audience for that statement, seated among her classmates, not beside the podium as a symbol, not positioned as a prop for the cameras that had gathered outside. She had asked specifically not to be placed at the front. She wanted to hear this as a student, not as a headline. When it was Darius's turn to speak, he kept it brief, the way he kept most things. "My daughter did not become worthy of respect when you learned my name," he said, looking out over students, staff, and parents who had gathered in that atrium. "She was worthy of it the moment she picked up that tray this morning, before anyone here knew who her father was." He paused, letting that settle. "The measure of a school is not how it treats its donors in the boardroom," he said. "It is how it treats a child in the lunch line on an ordinary Tuesday when nobody important is supposed to be watching." There was no applause. A few people wiped their eyes. Most simply sat with it, which felt to Darius like the more honest response. In the weeks that followed, more than one person asked Nia, gently, whether she wanted to transfer schools. A fresh start. A campus without the folding table's memory built into its floor tiles. She thought about it seriously. Her father told her more than once that whatever she decided, he would support it fully, and he meant it. In the end, she chose to stay. "Leaving might protect me," she told her father one evening at their kitchen table, long after the cameras outside the school had moved on to other stories. "Staying might protect the next girl who gets sent to a table like that one." Darius didn't try to talk her out of it, and he didn't try to talk her into it either. He simply nodded, the way a father nods when his daughter has become, in some quiet and undeniable way, someone whose judgment he trusts as much as his own. Ellison Preparatory Academy hired a new dining services director within the month, a woman named Aisha Monroe, no relation to Officer Rachel Monroe, who had spent 15 years running nutrition programs in the Philadelphia public school system before coming to Ellison. Her first act was dismantling the account override system entirely and replacing it with a transparent meal appeals process, complete with a simple code students could use to flag billing errors themselves, reviewed by a rotating committee rather than a single unchecked authority. Rosa Delgado was promoted to assistant dining manager 3 months later. She kept a small note taped inside her locker, one she'd written to herself the week the audit findings came out. "I stayed quiet because I needed the job," it read. "Now I use the job to make sure no one else has to stay quiet." Officer Rachel Monroe requested additional training on de-escalation and bias awareness, not because anyone forced her to, but because she said, in a brief interview with the school newspaper, that she never wanted to be the person who read a room wrong again and called it following protocol. Nia and Eli, together, founded something they called the Open Table Council, a small group of students who met once a month to review dining policy, run an anonymous reporting system, and organize cultural food days that had never existed at Ellison before. It wasn't perfect. There was resistance from a handful of families who felt the school had already apologized enough, but the changes held, month after month, in ways that were visible to anyone who bothered to look. A year after the morning a tray hit a countertop instead of a floor, Ellison Preparatory Academy opened a new building on the eastern edge of its campus. It was not called the Vale Wing, though Darius could have named it whatever he wanted. The plaque beside the entrance read, in simple engraved letters, "The Dr. Lena Vale Center for Food, Science, and Belonging." Darius stood in front of that plaque for a long moment before the ribbon cutting, reading his late wife's name carved into stone at the school where his daughter had once been made to feel like she didn't belong. Nia stood beside him, the small silver compass pin clipped to the strap of a new backpack now, no longer hidden, no longer something she needed to keep quiet about. "She would have liked this," Nia said. "She would have asked why it took a scandal to get here," Darius said, and Nia laughed, because that, too, sounded exactly like her mother. On family lunch day that spring, Darius Vale returned to the Ellison Prep cafeteria, the same room, the same serving line, the same counters where a tray had once been snatched out of his daughter's hands. He stood in line like every other parent that afternoon. No one ushered him to the front. No one recognized his name and cleared a path. He waited his turn behind two other fathers discussing a weekend soccer match, picked up a tray, moved through the line, and paid for his meal like everyone else. Nia met him at a table near the window. The same window, in fact, near where she had stood frozen a year earlier, with her hand still on a blue tray. She slid a fresh tray across to him, mirroring, without either of them planning it, the gesture he had once made for her. "You froze the first time you heard it," Nia said, watching him. Darius smiled, a sad, quiet kind of smile. "No," he said. "I froze because I realized how long you had been hearing it without me." They ate lunch together at a table by the window in a cafeteria that had finally become what its motto had always claimed it was. Not everyone who gets stopped in a lunch line has a billionaire father waiting at the door. Not everyone who gets accused unfairly has a $25 million donation waiting to make the adults in the room suddenly start listening. Most people, when it happens to them, just lower their head, carry their tray to another table, and quietly learn to say nothing at all. So tell me in the comments, if you saw someone being treated like they didn't belong right there in front of you, would you step forward? Would you record it? Would you speak up? Or would you look away? Be honest. That answer says more about who we are than we think. 2 years after that Tuesday morning, a letter arrived at the Vale family's home in Philadelphia. It came from a public high school in Ohio, a school with none of Ellison's ivy-covered walls, none of its endowments, none of its donor galas. The letter was from a 15-year-old boy named Marcus Ibe. He wrote that he had seen Eli's footage 2 years earlier, back when it was still just something students shared quietly among themselves. He wrote that his own school had a system almost identical to the one at Ellison, a special line that only certain students seemed to end up in, one that nobody could ever quite explain when he asked about it. He wrote that he had shown the footage to his principal, not as a threat, just as a question. Is this us too? His school ran its own quiet audit that spring. They found smaller numbers than Ellison had, 19 students over 18 months, not 31 over 2 years. But the shape of it was the same. A handful of accounts flagged more often than the rest. A pattern nobody had been forced to look at closely enough to see. Marcus's letter didn't ask Darius Vale for money. He didn't ask for anything at all. He only wanted Darius to know that somewhere a tray had been returned to a student who never made the news, in a cafeteria nobody outside that town had ever heard of, because 2 students at a private school in Philadelphia had refused to stay quiet. Darius kept that letter in the same leather folder he had carried into Ellison's cafeteria that morning. It was, he told Nia once, the only page in that folder that had never needed a single number attached to it to matter. Rosa Delgado's promotion led to something else, something smaller, but no less important to the people it touched. She built a training module for new dining staff at Ellison. 30 minutes, no lecture, no lawyer's language, just a plain walkthrough of what it looks like when a policy stops protecting students and starts protecting someone's comfort instead. Every new hire in food services sat through it. Aisha Monroe made sure of that. Rosa never talked publicly about what those 9 years under Marjorie had cost her, but every so often, a new kitchen worker would ask her, quietly, off to the side, what they were supposed to do if they noticed something wrong and were afraid to say it. She always gave the same answer. "Write it down first," she'd say. "Even if you're not ready to say it out loud yet, write it down. The truth doesn't disappear just because you're too scared to speak it today. It waits for you." Marjorie Whitcomb did not vanish from the story entirely, though she never returned to Ellison's campus again. A year after her removal, a short piece ran in a regional trade newsletter for institutional food service. Nothing dramatic, no names attached to any school. It was about the growing number of private and public institutions adopting transparent, appeal-based meal account systems, replacing the older, unsupervised, manual review models that had quietly existed in cafeterias for decades without anyone questioning them. Marjorie was never named in that piece, but somewhere in a town 2 states away, in a smaller school with a smaller cafeteria, she took a job managing dining services one more time. This time, the account system had no override function built into it at all. The policy had already been written to make sure no single person could ever again decide, alone and unquestioned, who deserved to eat without being stopped and asked to prove it. She never learned that detail had anything to do with a girl she once accused of using a card that wasn't hers. But it did. Every spring now, the Open Table Council holds what Nia and Eli call Open Table Day. No ceremony, no press, no plaque. Students from every background sit together at long tables set up in the same cafeteria where a blue tray once hit a countertop instead of a floor. Above the serving line hangs a single sentence, small enough that most visitors walk past it without noticing, exactly the way Nia wanted it. Every seat is earned by being human. Nia Vale graduated from Ellison Preparatory Academy the following spring, near the top of her class, having never once used her father's name to get there. She chose a university close enough to visit home on weekends
and far enough to build something entirely her own. At her graduation, Darius Vale sat in the audience like every other parent. No reserved seating, no special introduction. When her name was called, he didn't stand up first. He waited, the way he always had, and let her walk across that stage on her own 2 feet, into a future she had built without needing anyone's permission to belong in it. And somewhere, carved into stone at the entrance of a building that bears her mother's name, a single line still greets every student who walks past it each morning, whether they stop to read it or not. A compass does not ask who deserves direction. It points the way for anyone lost enough to need it.